things again today. We're going to go a little bit out of order from the written version. We've got a special guest who I'll let Gary introduce here in a second. So we're actually going to start with thing number 3 and TikTok facing a forced sale. But what comes next, Gary?
So, Rob, I got to tell you, when I started Deep Knowledge Investing, at no point did I think I would be discussing TikTok. And yet, here we are.
Here we are.
Right. And to make things even better, we have brought in a fantastic attorney. Phil Kessler of Kessler and Green is a phenomenal attorney. He is also, I'm proud to say, a member of the Deep Knowledge Investing Board of Advisors. And Phil knows a ton about the Constitution. He has actually argued a case through the United States Supreme Court and won it. He is a phenomenal expert when it comes to all things related to the court. And the case that we're talking about today actually could end up in an appellate court or possibly in front of the Supreme Court. Phil, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for your very nice comments. Always overly generous.
All right. So we're talking about the situation with TikTok. Last week, the U.S. House of Representatives voted 352 to 65 to force ByteDance, which is the owner of TikTok, to divest its subsidiary TikTok or be banned in the United States. Now, there's an interesting question. How exactly do you ban a website and an application that is used by well over 100 million Americans? I've actually read it's 170 million. But there's a really interesting question. Should this be done and can it be done? So for that, we're going to go to Phil. Now, one of the things I'm going to add before we do that is that there are a lot of people saying, hey, TikTok isn't really a Chinese company. There are all kinds of companies like BlackRock, General Atlantic, Susquehanna, the Carlyle Group that own interests in it. And that may be technically true, although I will point out that typically those ownerships in Chinese companies aren't actual ownership. They're typically holding shares or like shadow shares headquartered in the Cayman Islands that don't really exercise control of the company. But either way, the key issue is the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has what they call a golden share. They own 1% of ByteDance, but with that golden share, that enables the CCP to appoint a director to the board of ByteDance, provides the CCP with veto rights over business decisions, and most importantly, ensures the Chinese Communist Party has access to data from ByteDance and its subsidiaries. Who owns the company is not relevant. The key thing here is that the Chinese Communist Party has access to all of this data and they are harvesting it. Phil, is this legal? Is this reasonable? What should Congress be doing here?
Well, let's start with where we are. We have a bill that was passed by a substantial majority of the House of Representatives. Obviously, it has to go to the Senate. It's going to go to the Senate. It's been sent to the Senate, and the Senate will do whatever they decide to do with it. So the first question is, will anything come of this that's a law? That's a political question. My political read is probably, but who knows? Will it read it being a statute, that something that is approved and enacted by the Senate, that the House then reapproves if it's changed? Can that then, is it going to look anything like it reads now? Don't know. Again, that's political. What I see in reading this is something that lawyers and judges struggle with all the time. It is a document, a bill that's not all that clearly drafted in many respects. There are indications from what I've read in the commentaries, and you've read them too, that this was rushed through. That obviously that comes from people who are being critical of it. There's always another side to the story, but some of it reads as if it was rushed through, or the people who were involved in drafting it didn't use their time well if it wasn't rushed through. In any event, there's room for argument about lots of it, and so I think what the Senate will do and should is to take a very close look at some of the underlying premises. The clear object here arises from a concern which appears to have been reached as a conclusion by the FBI and other intelligence organizations. I can't speak to the accuracy of their conclusions or the firmness of their conclusions, basis of their conclusions, other than things that we have heard them quoted as saying. So we don't know the detail. So to assume for this discussion that I would hope that the Senate would make very sure that they understand in detail the basis of those concerns and can conclude, if they're inclined to do something here, that TikTok really does create a bona fide national security risk. It isn't something that's being hysterically blown out of proportion and isn't in the real world much of a risk at all. I hope they will one other resolve the question. So that would be the first.
Okay, so while we don't know how the Senate's going to vote, the vote in the House of Representatives was 352 to 65. That does indicate that the bill in that form, at least in the House, had bipartisan support.
Absolutely. And there were people in the House who were involved in intelligence matters who were very strongly in favor of the bill and advocates for the bill, which doesn't end the inquiry, but it does give it some colorable credibility.
Okay, so Phil, some people are saying that this is a First Amendment issue, right? That they have the right to use TikTok to say what they want, to advocate for whatever policies they want, or just dance on TikTok. Is this a First Amendment issue?
I don't really think so. It's something that at the surface looks like a First Amendment issue, but really isn't. There is no one on TikTok, so far as I can see, who if TikTok goes away, would be in any way limited, restricted, prohibited from expressing whatever they've expressed on TikTok or might want to express on TikTok in other major social media. So it isn't really true that somebody's speech is being chilled. It's rather like, if you go way back in the time machine, it's like somebody's soapbox being removed because there's a bona fide concern that the soapbox is somehow dangerous. And there are lots of other soapboxes in the vicinity that speakers who might use that soapbox can choose to use to express whatever they would have expressed on that soapbox. It really isn't. This is an attack on the machine, on the what I would describe as a speaking machine that's maybe also a spying machine. But it doesn't eliminate the speech.
So I think that's the key issue, right? The Wall Street Journal had a great example on that editorial page last week that if you use your pen to write something, that's free speech. If you use your pen to pick a lock and steal documents, that's an action that's not protected by the Constitution. And so the Journal further in the same article reported, I'm quoting from them, TikTok collects reams of sensitive data on US users, including their locations, search and browsing histories, keystroke patterns, and biometrics. That data is shared with the CCP. So I think the point of the bill isn't to limit people's free speech, their constitutional First Amendment right to say what they want. I think what they're trying to do is put a stop to foreign spying on well over 100 million Americans. So I think one of the things you and I talked about when we were discussing this last week is there's a difference between speech and action. Is that the right delineation here?
You could look at it that way. The way I see it is this is not about the speech. The speech is what lawyers and judges sometimes refer to as a red herring. It's about what the machine, my term, what the site is allegedly being used for, to spy on the United States. It's not about the speech. It's about how this machine is being used. And so again, if you eliminate the machine completely, if TikTok goes away, is it reasonable to believe that anyone who might otherwise hope to, expect to, plan on conveying ideas of his or of hers on TikTok would be prevented from conveying those ideas in equally effective social media? Is that a reasonable thing to conclude? And my answer is it's an unreasonable thing to conclude. No one's speech is being chilled, much less prohibited.
Okay, so that tees up the last question I've got for you, because you are somebody who has read the bill. Lots of people who are discussing it haven't. One of the things that came up, and we did touch on this in this week's written version of the 5 things, there seemed to be a lot of concern that people have that the way the bill is written could allow Congress or the White House to shut down Twitter if, say, they didn't like the way Elon Musk was positioning that platform going into the November elections, or actually enabled Congress or the White House to shut down individual websites who they might call misinformation. Other people might say, hey, listen, this is our right to speak the truth. This is how we see things. Based on your reading of the bill, are there potential hazards for platforms like Twitter or individual websites who would be owned by Americans, run by Americans, who would be engaging in speech that Washington, D.C. might not like, but would be covered under the First Amendment?
The structure and content of this bill, especially in its definitional sections, and there are definitional sections, they're interrelated in a way that's somewhat confusing in the way the interrelationships and the definitions are expressed. Having said that, so there's room for some argument about what some aspects of this bill really mean, but I don't see any room for argument that that an application, a website that isn't controlled by an entity or a person or both in a foreign adversary, which is clearly defined as 4 countries. It's China, it's Russia, it's Iran, and it's North Korea, period. They don't say and others. It's one of those. And in the absence of that kind of control, direct or indirect, I don't see any possibility of Mr. Musk's Twitter being shut down, at least not on the basis of anything in this bill.
So, Phil, I read dozens of articles on this. Your take on it, identifying that the bill is narrowly written regarding 4 enemy countries and is not an insane power grab by the people in Washington, D.C. That is lacking from every article I've read. Your perspective on this, I think, adds just an enormous amount to the discussion. Thank you for that. For people who are interested in, your views on such things or your legal services, how can they find you?
Find me at Kessler and Green LLP. Easy to look up, easy to find in New York City.
All right. Terrific. Phil Kessler, great to have you. So glad to have you on the DKI Board of Advisors. And thanks for joining us tonight.
I appreciate the invitation. It's been fun and great to see Robb's new hairstyle.
Thanks so much, Phil. Really appreciate your time.
I knew you would.
All right, Phil. We'll see you later. I'll talk to you later. So long.
Thank you, Phil. Awesome.
All right.
I can take the insults at my haircut. I'm just glad I didn't talk about any of my legal writing that I have.
The real problem is I didn't know what your hair looked like before. I gather this is a different style.
I guess. Gary's got a keen eye.
Very nice. All right.
Well,
thanks,
all right,
Phil.
guys.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Phil,
Take care.
Phil, thanks for joining us, and be sure to check out Phil and his group online, and if you need any direction, check out the weekly written 5 things. We got some links in there out to his website and firm. Moving forward, thing number 1, which will be thing number 2, we reorganized a little bit here,